Well, thank you all for making me and my wife, McCall, feel welcomed. My name is Walker. We're really excited to be here and excited for what the future holds. Something you should know about me is that I am a pretty big baseball fan. Do we have any other baseball fans out there? Yeah. I am a St. Louis Cardinals fan, my favorite team. Now, I know some of you are Royals fans out there. And that's totally okay. I can assure you that God forgives even the most egregious of sins. And if you're a Cubs fan out there, I think you'll skirt into heaven, but just barely. All kidding aside, I'm a Cardinals fan. And one of the most memorable moments from recent Cardinals history has got to be the 2011 season. Now, that season was a rough season for most of it. We get to the last month into September, and it turns out that, according to the analysts, there was only a less than 5% chance for the Cardinals to make it into the playoffs. The odds were completely stacked against them. But it just so happened that in September, the team got pretty hot and started rallying together. And as they got good, the teams that needed to be bad started to play bad. And all of a sudden, that 5% chance to get into the playoffs increased to 7% chance. Things are looking a little bit better, but it didn't stop there. With 16 games left, they just kept going more and more and more, and it went from 7% to 17%, then up to a 24% chance to win and get into the playoffs, and then the stars aligned, and it was the last game of the season. Everyone's holding their breath, because this game will decide whether or not they get into the playoffs. If they win, they're in. If they lose, they are out. And the end score for this game was 8-0 in favor of the Cardinals. They made it into the 2011 playoffs. And that didn't stop there. Their rally just kept on going. They blazed through the wild card game. They crushed the division championship. And then we arrived to the 7-game World Series. And man, it was a good one. There were so many memorable moments, like when David Freese hit the game-tying triple. That was on the last inning, the last out, the last strike of the game. And then he comes back around to the 11th inning in extra innings, and he hits the walk-off home run to clinch the victory. And then later on, they go and win Game 7 of the World Series, and they were the World Series championships. I'm never going to forget that moment. But what was so amazing is that there are many reasons why they were able to pull this incredible feat off. But there was one key element that it wouldn't have happened without it. And it was the fact that they were united. That against all odds, they came together at the right time as one. And today we are launching a brand new sermon series I'm so excited about called Community. And we are going to, over the next 5 weeks, look at the different ways that we as a church can build unity in our church community. And there's so many great things about that. I'm hoping that by the end of this series, we as a church will be even more unified than what we began, if that's even possible. But that might be a tough ask, because we live in a world where division is everywhere. We live in a world that we experience various tension points where we are more likely to divide than unite. For example, we live in political tension right now during this election season. We are in complete political divide. We have two sides running our country that are in polar opposite sides of things. On social media, you will see post after post where people slander and throw hate-fueled rhetoric towards one another. They will weaponize the other side's words to become the ones on top. There is political tension that leads to divide within our world. But there's also other types of tension points, such as cultural tension points, where we all come together, we live in different and have different lived experiences, and then we come together, and sometimes those cultural differences butt heads to one another. City living or country living, homeschool versus public school, upper class versus lower class, different ethnic heritages that we come together, and then sometimes that leads to cultural division. But probably the most common tension point that we experience on the day-to-day living is relational tension. Tensions that form relationally with one another. where there are personality differences that just clash once and for all, where fights come up time and time again. We live in a world where we see, and many of us experience, divorce, child-parent brokenness, dissolving of long friendships, passive-aggressive coworkers, and so much more. We live in a world full of tension points that lead to division. And sometimes, oftentimes, the division we see in the world bleeds into the church, where the things that cause tension out there become things that cause tension in here. And maybe that's why over and over the New Testament calls for us to have unity with one another. You can find almost a reference in almost every book of the New Testament about why we should be one, why we should be rallied together as in unity. Over and over it comes up time and time again. But why? Why is it so important for the church to be unified? Why did the early church care about it so much? And why should we spend our time, energy, and resources spending time trying to be unified as well? What's the big deal about it? And the answer to those questions is so simple, but it has profound implications for you and I today. And this answer is drawn from the words of Jesus himself. Jesus is with his disciples on a Thursday evening. They had just had the Last Supper, the Passover meal, and they are getting ready for what's to come. Jesus knows here that in a few hours he is going to be arrested, and in a few hours from there he is going to be crucified. He is going to go to the cross. And so Jesus, in knowing that, he begins to prepare his disciples then, who are around the table with him, for what's to come. And after he gets done preparing them for that, he says this incredibly beautiful prayer, a prayer that has a bunch of different subjects and themes. He starts by praying for himself and his relationship with God the Father, and then he moves on to praying for his disciples within the room, that they are empowered and that they will have the endurance to go on. And then he moves on to a third subject, and it's a rather unique one. You see, after he prays for him, after he prays for them, he prays for us. Jesus, in his moments leading up to the cross, intentionally prays for you and me. So if you have a Bible, we're going to check that out today. If you go to John chapter 17, that's where we'll find it. Again, that's John 17. If you have a digital Bible, that's great. I'm using the CSB translation. If you want to follow along in that translation, you don't have to, though. Any translation will do. John 17. And as we read verse 20, notice who his prayer addresses. John 17:20. Here's what Jesus says. I pray not only for these disciples in the room, but for also those who believe in me through their word. This little verse is so incredible to me. I didn't know about it growing up, and when I ran across this verse, it blew my mind. Jesus, in his ending moments, in his final moments in ministry, he chooses to pray for you and me. We were on Jesus' heart in his most vulnerable times. You see, this is one of the very few instances where Jesus explicitly prays for future believers, where he explicitly addresses and talks about and to us here today. And if that's the case, we need to lean into what Jesus is about to say, because he's talking right to us. So what's Jesus going to pray about? What's he going to pray for? Maybe he's going to pray that you and I have more faith. Maybe he's going to pray that we'll avoid temptation. Maybe he'll pray that we have a long, successful, healthy, wealth-filled life. There's a number of things that Jesus could have prayed for in this moment, but there was only one thing on his heart: unity. You see, Jesus desires his people to be one. Take a look at what he says here in the next verse. May they all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe you sent me. Jesus calls for us, he desires, he prays to God that his believers, his followers will be one, that they will be united, and that this oneness looks like the oneness that God the Father has with Jesus the Son. Now, this oneness that's being talked about here is relational oneness. This intimate companionship and this harmonious community with one another is what's being talked about here. That just as Jesus has relational oneness in such a deep way with God, we are to have it with one another. It's the image of us being attached to the hip with one another in love, that we love each other so much that we can't let go of each other. And our relational oneness does not just extend to you and I, but it also extends to us and God, that we experience that oneness with the Father as well. Oneness is so important to Jesus. But why? Jesus says that this oneness will prove to the world that God sent Jesus. Now, that doesn't make sense to me at first when I think about that. What's the correlation there? How does us being one show that God sent Jesus? Those seem two unrelated things. But I think here's why that is. Unity is hard. And as humans, our natural tendency is to divide rather than unite. It's inherent from the moment we are born to the moment we die that we are kind of selfish creatures. And we just can't get along about anything. We can't even decide whether or not pineapple should be on pizza or whether toilet paper should be over the roll or under the roll. Now, the correct answer there is no and over, but we'll leave that be for another time. But our tendency, naturally as humans, is to divide rather than unite. Unity is hard. But what if the church would be different? What if, despite our tendency to divide, we could somehow rally together as one? If that could happen, it would require a supernatural explanation. That someone more powerful than us was able to do something to bring us together despite us wanting to be separated from one another. And the world would see that, and the world would believe. And so Jesus prays that we are one, that we are united. But as I've said already, and as you know already, unity is hard. Unity is difficult, even in the small and silly things. When McCall and I got married, I didn't tell her something about myself. And that is that whenever I go to bed at night, sometimes I sleep talk and sometimes I sleep walk. I sleep talk often wherever I go. I sleepwalk at home occasionally from time to time. And when I sleepwalk, it's kind of like a big fever dream. Like I don't know exactly what's happening. I'm aware of what's going on, but my brain's not quite in control of my actions the right way. It's a weird experience. Maybe you can relate if you sleepwalk. But McCall had no idea about that. I kind of forgot to tell her about that. And so one day, I guess I should first say that it's a regular occurrence that I wake up McCall 2 or 3 times a night sleep talking. But there was one time early on in our marriage, a couple months in, where I had a sleepwalking episode where I shot out of bed and I started walking straight to the bathroom. And McCall, she stirs awake and she's going, "Walker, what are you doing?" And I turned to her and I said, "I'm taking a shower." And McCall goes, "What? You're taking a shower? It's 3 o'clock in the morning." And I go, "Because you told me to." For some reason in my head, I thought McCall told me to go take a shower at 3 in the morning. Now, that obviously is not what happened. She did not tell me to go take a shower. And she says, "Get in bed," and I huff and puff, and I go into bed and fall asleep. And then the next morning, after a really great night's rest of sleep for me, I had the audacity to roll over to McCall and ask her, "How did you sleep last night?" And in that moment, it became a tension point on what McCall could do. She could either choose to kind of be peaceful and not worry about it and just kind of try and keep the peace in her marriage, or she might pull her hair out in frustration. Unity is hard, even in the silly, insignificant things. And unity is hard within the church sometimes too, because our tendency is to want to divide rather than unite. Churches split and divide over the most silly and insignificant details, like what Bible translation we should use or the type of music we should worship to. A lot of times we in the church major in the minors where we let secondary issues become primary issues of tension. In the church, sometimes unity is hard. And maybe you know how difficult unity is on a personal level. Maybe there's someone in this room that you are at complete odds with. Maybe you have a personality clash with someone in this room, or maybe you had some scuffle in the past that's kind of led to a falling out. He runs over you, or she annoys you. Maybe it's even so bad that you choose to go to this service so you avoid them who attends the next service. Sometimes unity is hard. Or maybe you got into a fight with your spouse on the way to church this morning, and now you have to sit right next to them pretending everything's all fine and okay, but on the inside you are frustrated and distracted. Unity is hard. And so Jesus prays for us as a church to be one, to be united. But he doesn't just stop there. Jesus also helps us to be one. As he's going to tell us in a moment, Jesus has given us his glory. That he has given it for us to help be united. Take a look at what he says here in verse 22. I have given them the glory you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one. Jesus says that the glory that the Father has given him has now been passed on to us. Has now been passed on to us. Now, there's various opinions on what the glory means. Scholars are ironically divided over this question. But here's kind of where I land. I think that Jesus is talking about the glory of the cross. Now, we often sometimes associate with the cross negatively, that it was a shameful and humiliating experience, that was undeserved for Jesus to undergo, and all of that is 100% absolutely true. In fact, we probably need to be better about emphasizing that truth sometimes. But at the same time, the cross was a moment of glory for Jesus. That a weapon of death became a declaration of victory. That Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, his blood, redeemed the world. That the death of our King has led us to come together. That the power, the glory of the cross unites us on one front, brings us together. You see, it's not our ethnic difference or our economic difference or our financial difference or our social difference that brings us together. It's not what we have in common, whether it's relationally or culturally or socially, but it's the glory of the cross that brings us together. And here's the amazing things, friends. If it wasn't for Jesus' death on the cross, there would be no reason for most of us to associate with one another. I would have no reason to come and live in Lebanon, Missouri if it wasn't for that. And yet, here we are, together, united under the banner of King Jesus, one in his glory. And so Jesus has given us the glory to be one. He died so that we might be unified. That brings up that question again that we've been wrestling with all morning. Why? Why is unity in the church so important? Why did Jesus take the painful efforts to bring us together? Jesus is going to tell us the answer in this next verse. And his answer is so simple, but has profound implications for you and me. Here's what Jesus says. Listen closely. Verse 23. Excuse me. I am in them, and you are in me, so that they may be completely one, that the world may know you have sent me and have loved them as you have loved me. Jesus says that our oneness allows... Can I get my water bottle, McCall? I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. Jesus says, we're going to get through this, okay. And here's the funny thing. This has happened before, and like right after service, it's going to be all better, and it's not going to be like anything happened. Jesus says that the oneness that we have will show the world that God sent him out of love. That the love that we display with one another is the love that God shows the world. That we, in our unity, will become a witness to those on the outside. And how does that work? Why does our love for one another show God's love for the world? I think here's how. The love we have, the unity we share, is a unity of reconciliation. That we will not let divisions, dividing barriers stand. That when we have fallout, we will reconcile over and over and over because we love one another. And when we do that, it paints a picture for the world to see that that's what God had in mind for them. That God sent Jesus out of his love for the world to reconcile their relationship with one another. And so when we are one, we become a witness to the world. But that's easier said than done, and unity is hard. And sometimes I wonder what Jesus thinks when he looks down on his church, as he sees hundreds of denominations splinter and form, as he watches us major in the minors. I wonder if Jesus sheds a few tears when he sees us fighting on the inside. I wonder if sometimes he looks at us and goes, why can't they just see the bigger picture? Why can't they just get along? You see, friends, there's an ugly truth that comes with this reality. The ugly truth is that our disunity destroys our witness to the world. That when we fight and are ununified together, the world does not care about us. The world on the outside looks at us and goes, you're no different. You're no better than us. You look just like us. We do not look like a people that have come together under supernatural means and have been united and empowered by something bigger than us. They pay no mind to our words when they see that we are just like everyone else. But what if that was different? What would happen to Lebanon, Missouri, if Southern Heights defied the odds and were united under the glory of Christ? What would happen if we reconciled when there was fallout time and time again? What would happen if we were to come together despite economic, cultural, social, political tensions? What would happen if we were one? Jesus gives us the answer. And it's such a simple answer, and it's so profound. This answer was summarized in a different way by one of my college professors, and I could not word it any different. Here's what that is. When the church is one, O-N-E, the world will be one, W-O-N. The closer we draw together with one another, the more that the world will draw closer to Jesus. It's such a simple answer, but it has profound implications for how we live. But for us to get to that point, it starts with us to take individual responsibility, for us to individually desire to pursue that oneness. And so as we start this new series, as you guys go off into the world this week, I have a question I want you to chew on a little bit. I want you to pray on it, reflect on it, and answer this question. I want you to maybe even write it down or text it to you right now. Here is this question. I want you to reflect on it and then answer it later this week. Do I make church unity a priority? I'll say that question one more time. Do I make church unity a priority? For some of you, your answer might be, yes, I do. And if that's you, praise God, keep on going and doing it. But for some of us, as we reflect on this question this week, for some of us, the answer is sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And you think about the times where you did not have unity in the church as a priority. That instead, you let the tension points win out, or you let your own selfishness win out in a moment. For some of us, the answer is just no. It's not a priority. I don't care about it. You couldn't care less about unity in the church. And if that's your answer, that's totally okay. This question is meant for you to be honest with yourself. But it's also a chance for us to be coming on the same page with one another. Because if unity in the church is not your heart right now, my hope is that it will be, that you'll make efforts for it to be. Because that's what Jesus wants from us. Because when the church is one, O-N-E, the world will be one, W-O-N. Let's pray. Father, you are so good to us. Thank you for your son, Jesus, who has died on the cross and has redeemed us through his blood. Thank you for the power that's been given to unite us by supernatural means. And I pray that we can display oneness in our world today, that we can continue to go out and make church unity a priority. Let us keep our witness to the world in mind when we work with one another, talk with one another, live with one another. In your son's name we pray, amen. During this song, we want to give you a moment to respond. So there's benches down here that if you want to pray, maybe pray for our church during this season, that we will be more unified. If you want to come forward and pray, you can. Or if you want to pray for your own heart, your own reflection, you may do that. And maybe for you, you want to respond to the reality, the truth that our King Jesus was sent to die for you. That his blood makes you have the ability to be a part of this family. And maybe you want to give your life, commit to Jesus today and be baptized, sharing his death, burial, and resurrection. And if that is you, there will be people up front for you to talk with and make that decision. Let's go ahead and stand and sing.